All right. Welcome everyone to yet another episode of the HashiCorp Ambassador Thought Leader series, where we've got our best community members up here that are also our experts talking about the various areas in our space, right? So everything from infrastructure to networking applications to security. We've got techniques, principles, ideas, and really bad jokes. Like that one. It wasn't even a joke, was it, James? It's okay. So
it was quite funny. It was fine.
Okay, yeah. And hopefully some lessons that are actually useful that you all can take with you and improve whatever it is that you're doing in this space. So before we get started, as usual, I need to make sure that I show our community guidelines here. We do want you involved. We do want you to ask us questions that we may skim over and not answer, but we will try our best. But if you do, please follow our community guidelines, which is pretty simple. Just don't be a troll if that confuses you. We have the link right there for you to check out. This is going to be recorded, and by is going to be, I mean it is presently being recorded, and it will be available later on YouTube for you to pick up, and future Cole will eventually turn this into a podcast so that you can listen to it instead of looking at us. So let's go ahead and introduce the person here that is either to my left or right of me, depending upon how you're looking at this on screen. And I will, even though his name's right there as a spoiler, we will let him introduce himself.
Hello, I am James Sandford. I'm a platform engineer at Global Logic, and I stream every week with a couple other ambassadors.
Yeah. So I'm hopefully for the folks that watch this later, it's like it's got the point thing. It's like, all right, Global Logic. I've heard people on this before. In fact, I think our previous episode was a Global Logic person, right? We had Barnaby on. So how do we know that you're not like evil brothers? Tell me to differentiate yourself. Like, what else do you do, Global?
No, but so I suppose I'm certainly going more down the orchestration route.
Yep.
I think that links more into the kind of topic today. Barnaby, if you watch this topic, if you've not, you should definitely go back and watch it. Dives a lot more heavier into the security kind of nuts and bolts stuff.
Yeah. So the orchestration, I mean, we're going to be doing a lot more of the infrastructure stuff today, which is, in fact, when we got together and had our first sort of like brainstorm session, we spent a lot of time in or the orchestration stack, specifically in Kubernetes, which slowly became a why not Nomad. We'll say not rant. It was not a rant. It was a good discussion.
It definitely wasn't a one.
Yeah.
Let's go with that.
Yeah, and then it from there turned into this wider topic that you wanted to talk about today. That honestly, it's an interesting one. It's one where like everyone will like nod their head, like, yeah, of course you need that, and you ask them like, do you have that? And they're like, no, I'm never going to touch that. It's like, I don't know, I'm like chasing ghosts. So chasing ghosts is a very fun side project of many an SRE and DevOps person. So let's go ahead and what are we here to talk about today, James?
Yeah, so I suppose at a high level, it's all about how to use observability to try and work out the kind of scale that you should be working at, and then what that actually means, because it's so easy to start really big and end up really big, but not everyone needs to be the kind of massive banks of the world. People can just be little startups.
Yeah, and he's saying you should not feel bad if you're not. No, but I mean, it is very interesting, right? Because generally, if you are that startup and you do become, the next Fortune company by whatever means the writing room wrote your narrative arc, what happens sometimes is like you begin to like push it out, do more faster, even faster and quicker, or I'm going to fire you, right? And what happens is you're like, well, I got to do this now, so why would I take time to litter, as observability throughout everything? And then the next thing you know, you've got some behemoth of an architecture, and that is where sort of when we were talking, there was this cross between observability and complexity and dealing with that. So in general, like what about this topic do you think is most important? Because when any of the ambassadors get on, this is generally something that once we get into the weeds of it, they're like very like this is important, right?
I think I suppose the important bit is you can't do anything about what you don't know. And it's really hard to say how complex your system is, how much kind of toil or how much time you're wasting if you're not tracking any of it, if you don't have the kind of metrics to back up any conversation or debate you're having about your system, it's all just going to go flat because people are like, well, it's fine, it works. Why change it?
And how guilty are you of doing this, James?
As a consultant that normally comes in and builds a system at the start, very little. I can talk about best practices and set people up to succeed.
Yeah.
When I come back to the same client in the future, how it stands is how it's the client's problem, which I then have to go fix, is the fun part of consultancy.
So what is the usual genesis when you sit down with these different companies? Because, I mean, you've worked with all, just GlobalLogic in general. I know that you'll work with a variety of different clients and customers and the like. So what does the most typical genesis look like when you come in and are shown, like, this is what we have, right? Like, if you have, like, sort of a general, template of what you pretty much can predict what you're going to be working with, just so folks know sort of your starting point and they can relate to it.
Yes, a lot of certainly over the last couple of years, the clients I've been working with have got either a crazy on-prem setup or they've been diving into the cloud, and then they've looked at what they've got and gone, this is costing too much, too hard to manage, or everyone went down the DevOps route of let's give every dev team an infrastructure person and an AWS account. And let them manage their own app deployment. So it's how do you centralize your platform, centralize your systems, try and kind of wrangle an entire organization into a few AWS accounts, or at least a centrally managed way of deploying your AWS accounts, your applications, stuff like that.
Okay, gotcha. So So just for summary, you've got your little walled garden where stuff looks nice on the outside, but on the inside, it is not as, yeah. And then on the other hand, it seems to be like the most common starting point for you all is not after they've matured into the cloud side of things, but they've gone into it certainly, but it's sort of the Wild West thing where you've got all these different teams doing all sorts of different things, right? And trying to round them up and create something.
Their route to maturity is almost burn it to the ground and start again. Obviously, while your application's in production, you can't burn it down, but how do you build another platform that you can migrate to?
Yeah. And so that means that there's probably some situations where you step in and not only do some of these little smaller teams have observability set up, but maybe they have varying degrees and varying types and varying ways of dealing with it. Has that been the case?
Yeah. And certainly those are, when you're going to do a migration, finding the teams that are the kind of shining light, the best observability, the people that know what they're doing.
Okay.
Those are the people you want to get on board and help work with them. Because at the end of the day, 6 months, a year, however long, I've left that client. So finding the people that can be the champions and the ambassadors of the observability testing, kind of whatever system, are the people you want to kind of get involved to then kind of bring that over to the other app teams.
Oh, nice. So you're like everyone here contributes very well, and we appreciate you all. But those people are a lot better than the rest of you.
People care about different things. I'm sure every team has better things they're good at. Yeah. It's just finding people that align with what you care about.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. So it almost seems like the model then is identify the team that's most in line with where everyone needs to head and shame everybody else. And by that you mean. Right. Okay.
Maybe not so far as shame.
Yes. Sorry. Yes. Put up and use it as a good example. Okay.
You want to empower people, not shame them.
Yeah. And that's interesting that you said everyone has their different interests, which do probably manifest as these teams proof of concept out their own thing, whatever it is that they are passionate about. Right. That is what they do. Which you and yourself kind of have, and that's how this topic came to be. So there's kind of 3 main milestones we're going to step through today to sort of impart upon folks the idea of observability. This whole thing that, hey, you should take it more seriously, you should do it earlier, and what you should watch out for, and the why. So what are those sort of 3 big subtopics, James?
Yeah, so I suppose the three topics you kind of got cut waste. Obviously, everyone wants to save money. It's a very easy thing to start with. Metrics and logs, like if you can't measure what you're doing, like how do you even know where to start doing anything? Another thing that I think was my big emphasis for this is kind of keep it simple. I think a lot of people pick the tool they like and pick the way they want to do it. Heck, I am very well known for some of my colleagues for overcomplicating some solutions because, hey, I have an hour to do it. I might as well spend some fun doing it. But maybe that isn't the best for kind of future us, as it may be.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, sometimes you just, right? I mean, sometimes that becomes part of the fun of it, which is why we get into engineering in the beginning often isn't because we want to be told that we're behind and mess with Jira tickets. It's because the experimentation side is good. So cut waste being, let's take a look at the why, because we need folks to understand that, hey, quit waiting until it's too late or very late to throw this in. What are the sort of the tools and instruments you have at your disposal, those being the metrics and logs, and then what's sort of the result, plus probably James ranting a little bit about Kubernetes at the end, right? Yeah. So let's get into the whole why here. Like why is this? We've sort of set the situation up, but specifically around the concept of cutting down waste. This becomes a really big thing in the cloud thing when you look up and you say, oh, 32% of spend on average is literally just waste. Like you look it up and everyone's like, oh, there are so many servers that are oversized or that we're not using. There's stuff that's underutilized. And when they cut it down, they realize, oh, this was all just free money sitting on the table. What are your thoughts on that? How does observability play into that?
Yeah, obviously, as you're saying, there's just people are over provisioning and spending a lot more money than they should on these services. Certainly a lot of the people that are managing these stuff came from on-prem. A server takes 6 months to request, provision, deploy. So if you think your app's ever going to hit like a maximum size, that's what you need to provision as. Like you've got a shopping website. Black Friday is once a year. You do 100 times the amount of traffic on Black Friday. So your server needs to be able to handle that.
Okay.
Whereas in the cloud, you can just scale, or you can spin up multiple servers with a click of a switch. So you should be able to scale the server to how you're currently provisioning.
Go ahead. I have a question for you. Do you think that paradigm carries over from on-prem to cloud to the point of almost like keeping bad habits with you, right? Like, to where when these on-prems do take this dive into cloud, which you talked about in the intro, that this habit of I need to buy for the biggest amount of traffic, they go and provision instances for the biggest amount of traffic, like immediately.
Well, lots of the times they go, this is the box we've got on-prem, so I need that box in the cloud. Like there's not like for migration services, they don't even like rethink about their tooling. It's just, well, this works on-prem. I've had one client where they're like, here's the provision scripts, and it was just a bash script that set up the server as if it was on-prem. And it's like, cool, but like we have better tools than this. And it's fine. Obviously, that's if you're trying to move away from on-prem, you need to start somewhere. Okay. But there's the level of like, once you've done the migration and you're on-prem, do you need all these servers? Do you need them to be the same size? Heck, we had it with one client where their test and dev was the same size as production.
Nice.
Which is like, that's fine. It's fine to start, but we log into one of these servers, one of, 200 servers once a month or once every 2 months. Why do these 200 servers need to be sitting around? But it's just easier to be test is a copy of prod. So This is where we start.
So yeah, I got a question for you, and I'm gonna ask it like probably one of your many paranoid clients. It's like, okay, That makes sense. So we should size our servers for the traffic as opposed to me just sitting here and provisioning on the cloud for Black Friday, because that literally only happens once a year. However, it's like, we still account for spikes in traffic. Like if that is my like end game per year, where should I start? Like what should I begin with? Right.
Well, I suppose this kind of ties into the second topic, which is
to an extent. Yeah.
If you don't, yeah, I suppose if you don't know how much of your server is being used, it's really hard to get that information. Obviously, you can in test and dev work out and do kind of load testing and kind of spin up a server that you think may be good enough, run a load at it, see if it falls over, get to the point where hopefully, even if you're not doing infrastructure metrics, you're doing like how many sales do you make and how many people access your website. At least you have like business metrics.
Yeah.
You should be able to go, I don't know, 1,000 people log into our website every day, every hour, whatever.
Yeah.
Like do that testing on the server, see when it falls over, decide what your variance is, scale it up by that amount. Obviously, a lot of it is risk appetite. Like, what is the cost of this server falling over? Like that is, I think, a lot of all the production questions come into how much risk are you willing to take when it fails? How much does it cost? What's the chance of failing? All that like business risk stuff that people have, like they do that every day because that's their job. They just probably don't think about it at a infrastructure level. They just think about it at like if there's a bug in our website or if there's a vulnerability, that sort of stuff.
Interesting. Okay, so that is, and you know what, that was good and very good at not moving us into the second point, even though I totally baited you with that. You did great there. So one is, it's like, you need to actually have a good understanding of what those traffic levels look like. And it's like, okay, well, what I know that, how do I assess it? So it's like, well, we go to the business side of it. What happens if stuff goes down, right? What are the percent chances of things crashing? How bad is the code your developers wrote? Like, does it just crash regularly? And how long are you willing to wait for it to get back up? So it's like, almost like we need to measure the opportunity cost of something going down and you not having enough space and you getting a random spike of traffic, at 2 a.m. in the morning when you didn't know at all because people are accidentally Googling, like, I don't know, the wrong acronym or something and they hit your site. So that makes sense. And kind of like playing into that same point with the whole crashes, they might say, well, we don't know why our apps are crashing. Sometimes they just crash, whatever. There is the developer side of this, those software engineers and their incompetence. I'm kidding, their competence. And the impact, no one ever thinks of this. And you brought this point up that I found interesting. Like if you're a developer and you're used to deploying code to a mega server that has every single bell and whistle and as much CPU as it can in the world, that's going to affect how you write your code, right?
Yes. And it's only, I think it also affects it the other way because, on-prem, you have your massive server, but that's your limit. Like if you write your code to fill the space that it can fit in. Like if your application code, if your app's running slow and you can't do anything with your server, obviously you can write your code to the point where the server is starting to chug, and then you'll spend the time optimizing your code, making it run better on the tools available, because 6 months lead time, year lead times, that's not tenable for most applications. But in the cloud, you can just you can complain to the infra team, they've given you a box that's too small, ask them to give you a bigger box. And normally you've got your own, tickets and fires that you need to put out that are like, here are the bugs, here are the tools here are the features that we need, this is deadline, these are go live dates, all that sort of fun stuff. So if your application's running slow and you can just put the onus on the infra team going, hey, you need to give me a bigger server,
Yep.
it's a lot easier for them to just go, well, fine, like we've got enough pressure from the business to bump this server, so it's just the easiest thing to do.
Yeah, so both sides have their issues in terms of creating either bad habits or enforcing good habits for the devs. So he's kind of also saying it's his fault because as the bot originator. No, but I think that's. Oh, I think we just lost your video. So now it's just me. Hi everyone. I just grew in size here.
I've literally done nothing. Oh,
Yeah.
that's not a camera. Give me 1 second to remember how this tool works.
Yeah. So while he gets that up, so what's there we go. So what I think is interesting then, it's if you're on-prem, it's almost like your servers are like a cup, right? A fixed cup that you bought, and then what you put those in is like your applications. And if you have one that you fill to the brim, then when you're going to the cloud, folks are usually just looking for the same sized cup, right? But the issue is if you're a developer and you're like, I get 16 ounces, okay, I'm gonna pour this much crappy or good code into it, versus them saying like, you've got a shot glass. That creates some creativity in the developer, like you said, because like, well, I only have that much on-prem. I have to make my app work. I have to be optimal, as opposed to, oh, I've got a whole bucket. I can just write junk code. The interesting thing is the transition being, oh, well, we have this 16-ounce cup. Let's just find another 16-ounce cup. And you saying, no. Like maybe we can split this up into different cups. Or someone's like, oh, I only have a shot glass. Okay, maybe instead of optimizing your code even further, let's just size it correctly and make it a little bit easier on you. So they both influence each other. What other thoughts do you have on that?
Yeah, I think I was just thinking about memory leaking, which may be a little bit too complicated, but if your application is written, if your application is written in a way that you have a memory leak, so the resources that your application uses just increase exponentially. It's on a smaller system, it's a lot easier to find that, because if your app crashes, I don't know, once an hour, once a day, it's a lot easier to like, something's going wrong here. Certainly if it doesn't correlate to uptake in users or to uptake in application traffic. Whereas if it's just like, oh, my application's crashing, and when I look at it, it's using all the memory, so let's just increase the memory, and you almost never catch the fact that your application is forever like generating more resources or requesting more resources, just because you just look at it and go, oh, its memory's full, obviously needs more memory.
So remind me when we get to the third principle to come back, because that does beg the question of monolith versus microservices, right? So for our technical and business decision makers style folks, a memory leak, that is important, because what it means is, first up, it's probably your dev's fault entirely. And let's just be honest. If memory is like a table, a leak happens when I put something on the table and then I forget to take it off, and then the table just keeps filling up until the server's like, screw this, and flips the whole table, and then that's how the app crashes. So you're trying to find when you're done drinking your water to go and wash the dishes, okay? It's not cool. Go wash your dishes, get them off the thing, okay? So anyhow, that was not directed at anyone that I... Yeah, okay. So anyhow,
it's worth saying memory leaks can be like packages that are used or other tools, not just like devs writing bad code.
Yeah, of course. I'm not directing all of my ire at just devs. It's not your all's fault every time, most of the time. Okay. Anyhow, I tried to get you into this topic earlier. However, we sort of rolled it back and we talked and continued talking about the cut waste. And there's a lot of ways, right? Just projects get bigger, they afford bad habits. You're devs, it's not always your fault, but you could be better. And then of course the infrastructure doesn't necessarily have to be, I thought that point was really cool. It doesn't have to be what was on-prem. Remember, on the cloud, a few clicks, a couple lines of Terraform code, really just one change. You can size things up and down to fit better. But in terms of assessing that, you are going to need, well, the second point. So hopefully the second point makes more sense, which is what here again, James?
So it's kind of monitoring logs, the kind of bread and butter of observability. It's all really good to talk about cutting waste. We should make our server smaller. We should right size everything. we should kind of know when our applications are doing things they shouldn't be doing, but without actually having graphs and logs and the ability to kind of look at in a, I don't know, week, month, 6 month timescale, like how actually is your application managing? Yeah.
Yes. So here's where I kind of want to like begin with you let's go back to that other question. Like you come and I'm like, oh, I'm convinced you're right. That my Hello World application should not be taking up like 3 rack servers. There's no point for it. Where do I start? And you're like, well, you need this data. And I go, how do I get this data? Where do I begin in terms of setting up these metrics? Are there things that I can already go ahead and pull from? Like, should I go ahead and just start yelling at my dev even more? I mean, I already yell them at a lot, but what do I need to do? Where do I get started with setting these up?
Yeah. So, pre getting the devs involved, there's obviously a level of, there's a level of stuff the devs can do.
Yeah.
But if you're building a platform or you're managing a suite of AWS accounts and you want to just get some information so you have the tools to go to the devs, hey, maybe something's going weird here, or even just shrink things without devs knowing, if you're comfortable doing that. So taking AWS, just because it's one of the cloud providers that I have touched quite a lot. They use CloudWatch for their logs and metrics, and on any EC2, so any compute server, any of their kind of containerized stuff, they have systems that let you just take the resources that they're using and dump it into CloudWatch. So you can at a very high level see, oh, on this server, it is using 10% of its CPU. It's kind of, or it's using 90% of its CPU. Like it's either, there is a level that actually you'll do all this monitoring and logging and realize that actually maybe you need bigger boxes. Like this isn't strictly this will save money. Sometimes you'll look at it and go, oh, actually we do need more headroom. But though that's maybe the question where you get the devs involved.
Yep.
Normally at a platform level, you can get some logs out.
Okay, so that would be that's probably also the first step you tell folks, right? It's like, okay, you already don't want to talk to the developers. I don't want to either. And let's figure out what we can do without getting on that Zoom call, right? Which is, let's look at their platform, the different servers you already have, whether you're on-prem or whether you're on cloud. It doesn't matter. We have the 2 scenarios you gave us as the genesis, either Wild West on cloud, where everyone's doing their own thing, or on-prem, messy little walled garden. Either way, I want the stats that are available that the servers are already, that the VMs at your platform are already making available. What is the CPU usage per box, right? What's the memory usage per box? So let's say I'm like, okay, here, and I just give you like a big spreadsheet of all of that, right? I'm like, okay, because that data is pretty readily available. Unless you've picked, I don't know, I'm not even sure in which case that data isn't generally available, especially on the cloud side of things. What is your next step then that you generally tell them to do?
So it would be kind of, I suppose, crunch that data, like try and look at trends, look at, certainly if you've got the total versus of what's being used, you can start kind of digging down into are things the right size? Like, could they be smaller? And also trying to see, you then get an idea of like how much resources the apps are using.
Oh, okay.
Maybe also at a platform level, like it's not always the dev's fault. You have lots of services that are running because security wants this, auditors want that. Like you end up, some of these boxes, you end up filling like 10, 20% of their resources just with, I don't want to say bloatware, but the stuff the business has decided needs to be running on every server. And there's a level of like, I've had it before where I've had a tiny little app and I'm like, the server needs to be massive just because of the amount of business stuff that needs to run. So maybe there is a question like, do you need all this stuff? Or is there a way of doing it in a more clever way?
Okay. So that's kind of, okay. So there's a couple really cool concepts in there. I'll kind of let you choose your own adventure, which one you want to. First up, I got to point out that James is like, well, maybe it's not the devs. Maybe it's the security people. And then he's like, and then also maybe it's the business people. He's like, but it's certainly not me. Like, it's certainly not. It's gotta be.
I'm just spinning up a VM. It's,
Yeah. No. But the first thing is the whole concept of let's do something really simple. Let's get every single machine and box you have, and let's take the total amount of resources we have, the CPU, the memory, and then let's look at what's used versus. Like, we're not even looking at individual servers. We're just saying, okay, if that number comes back and half of it is just sitting there free, then that sounds like a good metric to then say, okay, go show this to your boss, okay, and just be like, look, we need change, right? Like that, is that generally how that goes?
yeah. I mean, there is cost involved to any work. So actually having the numerical value to be like, hey, I mean, essentially, you should be able to see your bill that this is costing and how much money you think you could be able to save.
Yep.
So just being able to go like, hey, this will save us, I don't know, 50% of our cloud spend. Generally, people will eat that up, and you'll actually get the backing to then actually go and do the proper work.
That is okay. So that's a really neat idea. So the second thing then is we actually talked about this last time. Just in our earlier sessions together. But there's also something that you said that I thought was neat, which was like, okay, so you've got that, but also you can stack rank all of the resources you have and see which the problematic ones are. So I just sort of said that generally. Can you explain that though?
Yeah, so there's certainly tools that do it. If you've got a spreadsheet, I mean, spreadsheet has a filtering tool. But
what's a spreadsheet? I'm kidding. Keep going.
Sorry, like an Excel spreadsheet.
Yeah, no, I know. I'm just being an idiot. Yeah.
If you've obviously only got a limited amount of time, everyone's only limited amount of time, limited amount of battles you can kind of fight in your day to day. So it's making sure that the teams that are the most egregious of these are the ones that you target first. Like if you've got one team that's has a box they're not touching 90% of the server, and you've got a team that's not touching 20%, you're a lot better off talking to the team that's got the 90% unused. Maybe there's a reason for it, but that's a very easy win if you can just be like, cool, I will delete a 0 from the resource allocation size and look how much smaller it is.
Yeah, I like that. So it's like, all right, so we're looking I hope that you use that term too, where you're like, team A, pretty good, team B, you all are egregious. Like, this is terrible. Like, look at Team C here. They're using a very small sliver. Why can't you all be more like your siblings? Like, okay. So the next thing was within any individual box, right, is like you said, it's not always the dev's fault. Sometimes it's just the software that's required from a business standpoint, right, or a security standpoint. Now, those are interesting conversations because those go from a, hey, write your code better to that's like a whole different conversation, right? Especially with security. Like, we don't want that much spyware, or for the whichever things. So how do those conversations generally go? Have you ever had a situation where it is so overly bloated that there's nothing you can do, where you're like, well, because you gave one example of that.
Not really. I have a personal messing around level, but that's the point where obviously I am in control. So I kind of have to have stern words with myself. As for, I've certainly had it where the applications running on a server aren't necessarily required. And certainly if you move away from the kind of pet server mindset and more to the kind of cattle mindset, the kind of the levels of what security and what patching needs to look like are different. Like, you don't need to be running Puppet every couple minutes to make sure your server has the latest patches. You don't need to be, scanning all the packages on your on your box to make sure that there's no CVEs in any of the Python packages installed and that stuff. Really, you should be scanning your golden image, and if there's a vulnerability found in the golden image, patch the golden image, redeploy your servers. Like, you almost don't need security still wants to some level, but you don't need the crazy, I'm going to scan everything on the box and make sure that there's no updates required static service, because that can be done. I suppose it's the shift left approach for
there it is.
vulnerability scanning, which
Yeah.
got to get those buzzwords in.
Yeah. So actually there's a lot of cool concepts in there. A couple that we sort of skimmed over. The first one is, you said when your server, if you're treating them like cattle. No. I know exactly what you mean by that, but this is an important concept but I've rarely heard of people bring up this particular idea as a reason to where, look, now you can safely remove like a good amount of quote unquote bloat in your golden image, which is the second term that I want to make sure people know. But let's talk about cattle.
Yeah. So the cattle versus pet ideology is, I suppose, back in the on-prem world, you provisioned a server, and that was the server for the life of the application. You need to make sure if there's a patch that needs to go out, you patch that server. If there's an OS like kernel update, you would like bare metal update to the server. You would run that without the server like going down, or would go down in a particular window because that's the only time the application was allowed to go down, and all that fun like change window stuff. Whereas the cattle mindset is, if there's something need to happen to the server, just kill that one and get a new one. Very much of a servers can be as short-lived as you want them to be, and I think containers are the antithesis of the. I'm using fancy. Why am I using so many fancy words today? The kind of peak of the kind of cattle idea, because if your application crashes, you just kill it and start another one, and I'm sure it'll be fine.
Yeah, which is, I mean, it's what's interesting. So the cattle versus pets, the less. And he
What is
lost
up with my camera? Sorry.
audio again. I was gonna make a joke as to why that was. The less gruesome analogy or terminology for cattle versus pets, because we go cattle versus pets, and we're gonna kill the server, right? Is immutable infrastructure, right? And that's something that comes along as much more conceptually digestible once you get to the cloud, even though it is possible on-prem if you're using virtual machines and containers, right? It's this idea is, I've got a server, instead of taking care of it constantly, making sure it's working like, Han Solo and the Millennium Falcon as it like goes down into crap, it's saying just clean slate every time. It takes us, like you said, in the first section, just a couple minutes to make a new one. If we can make a new one with a blank slate, let's just do that, right? That means, like you said, this leads to you being able to have the conversation with the business and with security. We don't need tools or other things on the server that deal with checking them after the fact, that deal with patching them after the fact. We can say, if we need to do that, let's modify our golden image. Okay, so I know what that is. I know a lot of people say it's very difficult for me to say golden image without a lick of sarcasm, because I just find that the terminology very silly. But how does that play into this as well in terms of like of what you just talked about?
I shouldn't say golden image. Okay, quickly define golden image is one of those things that's like, once you understand it, it's really easy. Actually defining the golden image. So using a tool like Packer, there's cloud native ones if you don't want to be in HashiCorp, but obviously everyone's here for the Hashi tools. So it is a way of defining your images your servers get built on, and having that stored locally, and every time you want to locally stored somewhere on the cloud remote. And every time you want to spin up a new server, you take a copy of that image. That is the base the server spins up from. And if you ever want to make a change to the base, you just you make a new golden image and then make a new server off that golden image.
Yeah, I mean, that's really that. It's once you get it, it really is. It's just kind of like your template for your next server, right? And this kind of leads into the next thing of like, well, I would assume this is the bridge where folks are like, okay, well, I need hundreds of different servers for different services, right, individually, and those then all need the ability to scale out to how many. And you're telling me to go put metrics systems and measuring systems and all of these Well, this kind of plays into that whole, well, ideally, you're pulling this all from a template, an image, whether that's a container image or a machine image, doesn't matter. And you're throwing these different logging systems into there. So is this ever a conversation you have with folks to like help them deal and making sure those things get out versus patching servers with software or what?
Yeah, certainly. Actually, with my current client, I'm having a conversation with about logging and metrics and kind of where the application needs to, like, because we're doing multiple golden image layers. So one image, you build an image with some config, and then you build an image with other config and kind of build on top. And it's kind of where in that kind of sandwich of images does your monitoring and logging kind of tools get deployed. And I'm very much in the mindset of like the first image, like almost a company-wide, if you're deploying to AWS, it needs to run on this image. As much as you should harden the image, like that's where security compliance should go as well. Okay. Can also have the metrics and logging built in. So anyone that goes, I want this server, just by default, they have all their metrics and logs. Whether they use it or not is a different matter, but they at least have the data, and it's a lot easier to have the conversation with the data if you can go to them and actually there's been 2 months of the data backing up, and then you can be like, oh, well, you can see all of this stuff, then let's start the conversation. Oh, now we need to wait a month or two before we can actually get anything crazy useful from this, and then we can do stuff about it.
This is what I love about having y'all on this series, the different ambassadors, is that it's one thing to come up with and say, oh, we need metrics and logging. It's another thing to say, how are we going to convince the wider business to actually buy into this? And that, I think, is a really neat segue of saying, look, once you get into cloud, or it doesn't even matter, even if you're on-prem and you're just using VMs or containers, you all have base images that are getting deployed. You and I both know, and security's already convinced you that you need a base layer that has common software. All I'm telling you to do is add this to that base layer and think about it, because it's going to pay off down the line, just like the stuff that's in the security. Does that sound right?
Yeah, definitely.
So there is one last point in this one before we move on to our last subtopic, which is now we get to point fingers at the devs. All right, we are at the point where we have cut down the other software, we've stack ranked the servers, we've done a little bit of sizing, but there's still some stuff there. At what point and what do I do if I've got to go to a dev and say, your application, I know what it's doing, okay? It is just making a couple graphs. That's all the service is. Why is it taking up more like resources than every other app we got? Like, what's going on, y'all? Like, what does that look like?
Yeah, so obviously, at the base level, there is the application. That's the thing that should be using most of the resources. I would try very heavily to suggest to the dev there is benefits for them for this metric and logs, not just riffing on them for using up too much money. So at a high level, obviously, production is not to be touched. No one goes to production. Their application gets deployed. If it crashes, that's a shame. The ops team goes and like restarts it, and we're all happy. Mm-hmm. Moving more into the like DevOps, SRE world, where we actually want the application teams to have more power to care about production. Having the logs and metrics from that means if something does go wrong, even if obviously the first job is restart that app, no one cares, just get it restarted. Mm-hmm. The after the fact, the kind of what went wrong, having all the logs and the metrics can be helpful for the devs to go like, oh, actually, this is the problem, and they can then go and fix it. So it's not they have to trawl through their code and try and work out like what possibly should have gone wrong. They can be like, that's the line that broke. Or metric-wise, they could see, oh, we just hit the memory limit of our server, so actually we usually need a bigger box otherwise. There is another side to what the devs can get out of metrics and logging. And you maybe wouldn't do this in production. This is more of a dev and test side. But you can get telemetry data. So you can track the packet. So you can track the request from the user's website into the back end through every single function in the application, see how long each of those requests take, see the route it travels within the application, and get that information out. Which, if we're assuming the devs care about writing the most efficient, best code they can, which part of me really hopes they do, this will hopefully give them the ammunition to go to their bosses and go, hey, this bit of code needs to be reworked because it will save us time, save us money. Maybe someone's web request will take half the amount of time, because at the end of the day, if a website's slow and unresponsive, you don't really want to be traveling that website. Yeah. So there is more business, like sales value, not just kind of business savings value in making the application run smoother.
All right, so there seem to be like two big ideas there, right? Like under the assumption that, I loved how you're like, assuming they want to write good code, right? Yeah, assuming, well, we're going to stick with that assumption. Number one is like just handing the metrics over to the devs and say, look, like, you could almost like make it a personal challenge. Like, look, I know what your app's doing, and Bob's app is doing it way better. Like, look at these metrics. Like, why is it peaking above this much CPU, right? And this gives them the like a goalpost, because when you're developing locally, which often you have some sort of local dev environment or some glorified dev box in the cloud or something, and it depends on what your company allows for, you're probably not paying as much attention to those metrics because you don't necessarily have to. Like, hopefully you are, but with them put in your face, it does give you a bit better of a benchmark to try and reach for as you correct your code, right? So that's part one. And then the second one is telemetry. This lets you fine tune exactly what part of your application is doing this. And this sort of ties back to two things that I think are interesting. One, what the ops person does at the beginning of this conversation, which is getting all the different platforms, looking at resource usage, right? And then the same thing here is almost on the zoomed in level for the developer, right? We get to look at your application as a whole and say, wow, dude, why is this app going so crazy? Maybe we should go in deep, and then looking at the individual things and sort of pointing fingers, right?
Yeah.
Which kind of goes back to the whole, like the very first episode we ever did in the HashiCorp Ambassador series, which was the whole idea of tech debt. How do you convince to pay it down? Well, this is how. This is why you need observability and metrics, because you can't just be like, I want to refactor everything. Every manager ever is going to be like, no, I already have enough problems with you. I don't want to wait for you. And you're like, here's why, right?
What's the value? Why should we care?
Yeah. And there we go. So that comes out. You want to cut waste. And now James is telling you how. We need to set up those metrics and logs. These are the varying types. Let's get a bunch of them in the base layer of all of your templates for your servers, your images, and let's set up telemetry for your applications. This way we can actually have a conversation with numbers with the folks who are obsessed with them, right? Okay, so that takes us down to our third point here. And this one's, I'm trying to find a bridge into it, but let's just dive into it. What was this third idea here?
So this is all about keeping it simple. So I suppose one of the main reasons why I picked this one is most of the teams that I have been a part of and kind of seen friends work on, colleagues work on, every company does things, I think, at a bigger scale than they probably need to, or someone has gone, I'm going to might as well say Kubernetes now. Someone has gone, I want to deploy Kubernetes. This is the buzzword. Everyone likes Kubernetes. Let's deploy Kubernetes. Mm-hmm. And then you end up having a team of 5 or 6 people managing an entire Kubernetes cluster. And you then have all the kind of man hours just to make sure that this cluster is happy. And then on top of that, you need the people that deploy into the cluster. You need to upskill your teams in how to manage all the charts, how to kind of get the information into kind of into and out of Kubernetes. That's not saying that Kubernetes is bad. It's just I think there is some complexity involved in something like Kubernetes, and I think even the cloud is the same. But we have lots of engineers that understand how the cloud works, so that's less of a problem.
Yeah. So this sort of actually wraps all the way back around to the actual title of the talk, right? But it starts somewhere very differently than perhaps I thought, because we're coming from, as developers, as operators, DevOps, whatever you want to call yourself, it's very fun to thought experiment from a greenfield perspective of, I have nothing, let's begin from there. But the reality is you're probably starting from some point, and that point is either on-prem or Wild West cloud, which before you make the decision to say, oh, let's just use Kubernetes to make dinner tonight as well. Like, let's measure stuff, figure out what's going on, and then make the platform decision. Thus tying in, hey, if you have observability first, you can then make the decision, right, to whether or not you should use it.
Yeah, I mean, if you're trying to spin up, I don't know, 5 apps, Kubernetes is not for you. But even, I mean, yeah, there's a level of like scale, size. There is a level where actually just an EC2 box, like a compute server with an app running on it, can be fine. Like that can.
Oh, are you sure?
If all you need to do is run like one basic application, like sometimes that can be fine. Obviously, there's also then going, if you're actually building a platform, thinking about kind of the right size. So if you're kind of startup level, or even a big bank, but like if you're startup level where there's not one person that's going to manage your platform, like pick a tool that lets you it will just work, or it's easy to pick up. I'm just going to say Nomad's really good for this, because I really enjoy Nomad. I wish I could use Nomad more, but it is. I think it's significantly simpler to spin up, because you can. It is just a binary in the config file, and that's it. If you don't do a cloud managed Kubernetes service, good luck. That's all I'll say. I've tried, and it's a lot of like managing certs, which is fun.
So let me ask you then for this, because this will tie us back into using observability to tame complexity. Here's the reality, whether I talk to someone at a startup or a Fortune 500 company, somehow there is like probably a greater than 61, I'm making this number up, 61% chance that they've gone all in on Kubernetes regardless. Like, it's already there. That's why we like have every other week there's a new startup that does something to help you tame Kubernetes, and it's usually like around making it better, which you would think at some point we would get the sign. Like, they're actually like listed companies and every title is basically why it should be better and why it's causing you pain, which is kind of funny, right? But at that point, they're going to say, well, it's for the same reason I buy an over souped up computer, because I might need it one day, right? I might get there. I'm building for an aspiration. It almost comes back to the whole, like, I buy the box for Black Friday. It's like, well, I'm buying the deployment for, when we actually do blow up. And they say, okay, observability now, right? When you get this task, do you just go and say, okay, fine, let's just set it up. We'll get all your metrics and logs so you can at least optimize this deployment. Or do you ever use them to say, okay, maybe you should switch your platform. Maybe since you only have a monolith, you don't need this. Like, what do you do here?
I certainly think that measuring the cluster itself is important, because as much as it's the applications kind of running on the kind of nodes, knowing how much of they use is important. There's also the cluster itself, the kind of control plane system of whatever tool you're using has overhead. And if you're certainly small, if you're small but still like enterprise, so you still need high availability, all that sort of stuff, there is a kind of minimum size that you can have for these clusters. And it's kind of knowing how much that costs you, and also not just monitoring your kind of application technology, but there's also a kind of a human element of this. Like, are we spending half our week just managing the cluster and not actually doing any work? Like, are we getting to the point where we need to hire more people just to manage the platform, when actually the point of the platform is to just be almost invisible and just support the services that are running on top of it?
Interesting. I like how we get into this and you keep adding very similar concepts that play themselves out in the same way. Which the first one was like stack ranking the actual servers. Let's see what the aggregate resource usage is versus what's being wasted. And the next time we got to the second point, it was applications, right? What are they doing versus what's being used? And then now we're actually at the people side of it, which is a good point to measure your platform in terms of like, look, this is supposed to streamline stuff. How much of our people's time is going to actually managing the platform and keeping it up itself, right? Which is interesting because I'm sure at some point it was like, well, you're the infrastructure guy. Why are you asking us this? Or like, how do you have that conversation? Like, because it's a good point and it is your responsibility as well. But someone's going to be like, well, I don't know how to finish that question. But hopefully the question.
Well, it's if you're, I suppose the toil, the like SRE toil term is where that falls in. But the same way you're giving the devs the ability to go to their managers and go, hey, we need to spend the time clearing up our tech debt because this is all the kind of value you'll get to us. You can do the same thing for kind of your time. Like,
interesting.
This, I suppose, ties more into the DORA metrics. If people have heard of them, it's a set of metrics for like how to track how like performant a team's being. In heavy air quotes, some companies like them. There is problems with them, as with everything.
Yeah.
But it's a good way of being like, actually, how much of your time are you spending just managing the platform, and how much of the time are you actually giving new features to the developers that ultimately are the ones that make money for the company? Like, the platform doesn't make any money; it just costs money. So you want to be spending as much time as you can empowering the developers and giving the developers new tools so they can go and kind of bring in the income.
That's a really neat idea. Of course, I'm sure some SRAs are sweating. They're like, I don't want to be measured like that. Please don't measure. But it's also just for your own, like, it is more interesting to iterate on the platform and build things out versus put out fires, right? Like, ultimately, it is kind of this weird joke where like automate ourselves out of a job. Like, we don't obviously actually want that. But it would be nice to instead, what people miss when we say that is like, yeah, and then you take that time and you put it elsewhere, right?
Yeah.
You take that time, you do other things. So this is that interesting third side of observability to where, hey, the measure of your complexity, it sounds like you're saying the measure of your complexity is really how much time you're spending putting out fires versus adding cool things, right?
Yeah. Yeah. If devs, platform engineers, whatever level, are just managing the platform, not doing the fun stuff, then something's definitely gone wrong somewhere.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, so we're coming up on the thing here. I mean, that was, if you can't keep it simple at the beginning, if you somehow missed the train and you went all in on a Rube Goldberg machine first, it seems like your step from that journey is, okay, let's roll it back and make it simple. The measure of simplicity isn't necessarily the underlying system, because you can only cut Kubernetes down so much, right? Or that wasn't meant as a dig. But that should say something when I don't even mean for it to be a dig, but it is. But take a look at making it so that you have more time back to the platform engineer, right? And then in addition, then we can start looking at the other things as well, and maybe those are all intertwined. But give us your summary of like sort of the three main ideas here on this topic, James, just to wrap people back around.
Yeah, I suppose. Yeah, so it's obviously cut waste. We just want to, like, as a business, you want to save money. Cutting server costs definitely makes that goal quite simple. Metrics and logs, you can't cut or you can't, like, it's hard to cut or you can't measure. You want to measure your platform so you know what you're doing with it, and then keep it simple. Like, we make things over complex. It's fun, but at the end of the day, it bites us in the butt. So we need to just go for the simple approach, and then everyone's life will be simpler.
Yeah, and everything really is tied back to observability, not just for you cranking out better code, not for you just optimizing your platform, but also so you can influence the whatever world you have around you to help actually get those decisions pushed through so you can get it done. So I think that makes sense. All right, James, we are up here at the end. I know that there's some things you wanted folks to check out. Obviously, we're streaming on LinkedIn, so you should be able to find James right there if you want to add him. But I know that one of the first things you wanted shown was something that Barnaby also wanted shown, which was, let me show the banner here, the dev cast ops. You want to tell them a little bit about that?
Yeah, so me, Barnaby, who was on thought leadership last time, 2 times ago.
2 times ago, I think, yeah.
And Wale, who is also ambassador, and someday we will persuade him to do his own thought leadership. We stream, we are spinning up our own HashiStack cluster, and we try and do very little outside the stream. So it's all very raw. How do we get any of these tools to work with each other? I find it a lot of fun, but maybe a little bit more complex. And we also stream that's on Monday we stream, and then on Saturday we do a game stream where we are currently killing aliens in Factorio. But that's how do we automate everything in the game?
Nice. Okay, so that's one. And then if you missed the live stream, I know that you can check them out on YouTube, right?
Yeah, and we upload everything at some point later on YouTube. If I remember.
Nice. And then of course, if you want to connect with James here, we've got his LinkedIn up, so you can ping him and send him.
Happy to have any random conversations about this stuff.
Yeah, especially. Never mind. I was going to make a recruiter joke. I won't make it. So, and then finally, the company that you're with, James.
Yeah, I work for GlobalLogic. We're a kind of global consultancy, do all things. Us as platform engineering, we also do data testing. Anyone that has any interest in any of the stuff, you're welcome to reach out, and we can chat about how we can improve other people's companies as well.
All right. Well, thank you so much, James, for taking the time. I think there are a lot of neat ideas of the magic of some of these episodes. We always start off with one topic, but we don't always necessarily like spend the majority of time. And we got to visit a lot of really neat concepts. So I really, really appreciate your time. And thanks for everyone who tuned in and who's tuning in the future. If you're watching this after it's recorded, we'll continue to do more episodes in the future. So until then, thank you very much, everyone.
Bye.